At 35,000 feet above the Colorado Rockies, Captain Manny Rodriguez felt the familiar vibration of his twin-engine Cessna Citation cutting through the crisp mountain air. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. What started as a routine charter flight from Denver to Aspen was about to become the most important decision of his life. In the passenger cabin behind him sat Jessica Chen, CEO of TechForward Industries, clutching her chest as her breathing became increasingly labored. She had boarded the plane just 2 hours earlier, looking perfectly healthy in her designer business suit, briefcase in hand, heading to a critical board meeting that could determine her company's future. Now, as Manny watched her reflection in his rearview mirror, he saw something that made his pilot instincts kick into overdrive. Her lips were turning blue, her hands were trembling uncontrollably, and she was struggling to speak coherent words. This wasn't turbulence anxiety or motion sickness. This was a medical emergency at an altitude where every second counted, and the nearest major hospital was still 40 minutes away if he continued to Aspen. Manny had two choices: continue to his planned destination where Jessica's important meeting awaited, or make an emergency landing at a small regional airport that would cost her millions in lost business opportunities, but might save her life. For most pilots, this would be an easy decision, but Manny Rodriguez wasn't most pilots. He was a single father whose 8-year-old daughter Sophia had been obsessing over TechForward Industries for months, dreaming of one day working for the company that created her favorite educational apps. Little did Jessica know, as she fought to stay conscious in the leather seat behind him, that the pilot making split-second decisions about her survival was the father of her biggest young fan. And little did Manny know that this emergency landing would set in motion a chain of events that would change both their lives forever. The mountain peaks below stretched endlessly in every direction, their snow-covered summits gleaming in the afternoon sunlight like jagged teeth, waiting to devour anyone foolish enough to venture too close. But Manny wasn't thinking about the landscape. He was thinking about Sophia's face when she showed him her latest app creation, inspired by TechForward's coding platform for kids. He was thinking about how this woman behind him had built an empire from nothing, creating technology that inspired children like his daughter to dream bigger than their circumstances suggested possible. Most of all, he was thinking about the Hippocratic oath that his late wife, Dr. Elena Rodriguez, used to recite during her residency. First, do no harm. Sometimes doing no harm meant taking the biggest risk of all. Manny Rodriguez never imagined that flying charter planes for wealthy executives would lead him to the most important moment of his career. 3 years earlier, he had been Captain Rodriguez of United Airlines, commanding massive Boeing 777s across international routes, earning 6 figures annually while providing a comfortable life for his wife Elena and their daughter Sophia. His airline career represented everything he had worked towards since graduating from the Air Force Academy, a steady progression from military transport pilot to commercial aviation, with benefits, security, and the respect that came with wearing captain's stripes. Elena had been the family's other pillar of strength, a brilliant emergency room physician at Denver General who could diagnose complex medical conditions with the same precision that Manny navigated through violent thunderstorms. Together, they had created a life built on dual careers that demanded excellence, discipline, and the ability to make life-or-death decisions under pressure. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Sophia grew up understanding that both her parents held jobs where other people's safety depended on their expertise, where a single mistake could have catastrophic consequences. The night that changed everything happened on a Tuesday in December. Elena had been working a double shift in the emergency department when a drunk driver ran a red light, striking her car as she drove home through the early morning darkness. The irony was crushing in its cruelty. A woman who had saved countless lives in emergency situations died in the very type of accident she had treated hundreds of times. Manny received the call from Elena's colleague, Dr. Patricia Wells, who could barely speak through her tears as she explained that Elena hadn't survived the impact. The months that followed blurred together in a haze of funeral arrangements, insurance paperwork, and the impossible task of explaining to a 5-year-old why mommy wasn't coming home anymore. Sophia, who had inherited her mother's quick mind and her father's determination, struggled to understand how someone who fixed broken people could become unfixable herself. She began having nightmares about emergency rooms and ambulances, associating her mother's workplace with loss rather than healing. Manny tried to maintain his airline schedule, but the demands of international flights became incompatible with single parenthood. The job that had once been his pride became a source of constant stress as he worried about Sophia during overnight trips to London or Frankfurt. He needed Elena's sister Maria to move in as a full-time caregiver, but even with family support, Manny felt like he was failing both his daughter and his passengers by being mentally present for neither. The final straw came during a particularly turbulent flight from Denver to Tokyo. As Manny fought to maintain control through severe weather, his mind kept drifting to Sophia, who had been running a fever when he left for the airport. He found himself making navigation decisions based on worry rather than weather data, second-guessing his instrument readings because part of his attention remained focused on his phone, waiting for updates about his daughter's condition. When they finally landed safely in Tokyo, Manny realized that his grief had compromised his ability to fly safely. Within 6 months, he had resigned from United Airlines and started flying charter planes for Rocky Mountain Aviation, a small company that handled local flights for businesses and wealthy individuals who needed quick transportation around Colorado. The pay was less than half his airline salary, but the schedule allowed him to be home every night for Sophia's bedtime stories and every morning for breakfast before school. He traded his captain's uniform for casual flight clothes, his international routes for short hops between mountain airports, his financial security for the peace of mind that came with being present for his daughter's childhood. Sophia adapted to their new circumstances with the resilience that children often display in the face of loss. She threw herself into learning, particularly gravitating toward technology and coding as a way to create order in a world that had proven unpredictable. Her favorite discovery was TechForward Industries' educational platform, where kids could design their own simple apps and games. Sophia spent hours after school working on projects, creating digital stories and interactive puzzles that helped her process her mother's death in ways that traditional therapy couldn't achieve. Manny watched his daughter's passion for technology grow, amazed by her ability to learn programming concepts that seemed impossibly complex for someone her age. Sophia would show him her latest app creations with the same excitement she had once reserved for her mother's stethoscope and medical equipment. She talked constantly about TechForward Industries, researching the company's history and memorizing details about their educational initiatives. Her bedroom wall was covered with printouts of TechForward's coding tutorials and pictures of their Denver headquarters. Now, as Manny looked at Jessica Chen's deteriorating condition in his rearview mirror, he realized that fate had placed him in an impossible position. The woman whose company had given his daughter hope and purpose was depending on him to make the right choice, in a situation where there might not be a right choice at all. Jessica Chen had built TechForward Industries from a cramped studio apartment in downtown Denver, surviving on instant ramen and coffee while coding 18 hours a day. Her journey to becoming one of Colorado's most successful tech entrepreneurs began with a childhood spent translating for her immigrant parents at parent-teacher conferences, doctor appointments, and business meetings. The responsibility of bridging two languages and cultures taught her that communication was the foundation of every meaningful connection, a lesson that would later inspire her to create educational technology that broke down barriers between complex concepts and young minds. Her parents, Wei and Lin Chen, had arrived in America with engineering degrees that weren't recognized by U.S. institutions and dreams that seemed impossibly distant from their reality of working double shifts at a restaurant in Denver's Chinatown. They spoke limited English but possessed unlimited determination to provide their daughter with opportunities they had never experienced. Jessica grew up watching her brilliant father, who had designed bridges in Shanghai, wash dishes in a kitchen where no one understood his ideas about structural engineering. She saw her mother, a former mathematics professor, clean office buildings at night after spending days caring for other people's children. The disparity between her parents' capabilities and their circumstances created a burning drive in Jessica to prove that intelligence and hard work could overcome any obstacle. She excelled in school not just to make her parents proud, but to validate their sacrifice and demonstrate that their decision to leave everything behind had been worthwhile. By age 12, she was teaching herself programming languages from library books, creating simple games on an ancient computer that her father had assembled from discarded parts found in dumpsters behind electronics stores. Jessica's first real breakthrough came during her sophomore year at the University of Colorado, when she developed a language learning app that used gamification to help immigrant children improve their English skills while maintaining connection to their native languages. The app caught the attention of several venture capital firms, but Jessica turned down their offers because she realized that their vision for the product didn't align with her mission to serve underrepresented communities rather than exploit them for profit. Instead, she spent 3 years after graduation working at various tech companies, learning how successful businesses operated while quietly developing her own educational platform during evenings and weekends. She studied how children learned most effectively, researching cognitive development and educational psychology to understand why traditional teaching methods failed to engage students who learned differently. Her breakthrough insight was that children didn't need to be taught coding like miniature adults. They needed coding to be presented as a natural extension of the creativity and problem-solving they already possessed. TechForward Industries launched with a single product, an educational platform that allowed children to create their own interactive stories by combining visual programming blocks with artistic elements. The platform was designed to be accessible to children regardless of their economic background, family structure, or previous exposure to technology. Jessica priced the basic version affordably and created robust scholarship programs for schools in underserved communities, ensuring that financial barriers wouldn't prevent any child from experiencing the joy of creation through code. The company's growth exceeded every projection Jessica had created in her business plan. Within 2 years, TechForward's platform was being used in over 3,000 schools across the country. Children were creating games, animations, and interactive presentations that demonstrated sophisticated understanding of logical thinking and creative problem-solving. Teachers reported that students who had struggled with traditional academic subjects were thriving when given opportunities to express their intelligence through coding projects. But success brought challenges that Jessica hadn't anticipated. As TechForward grew, she found herself spending more time in boardrooms than working directly on product development. Investors pushed for rapid expansion and higher profit margins, suggesting changes that would compromise the educational integrity of her platform. They wanted to introduce premium features that would create a two-tiered system, offering advanced tools only to families who could afford expensive subscription plans. Jessica resisted these pressures, but the constant battles with her board of directors were exhausting. She had started TechForward to democratize access to quality education, not to create another product that reinforced existing inequalities. The irony wasn't lost on her, that as her company became more successful, she was spending less time with the children who had inspired its creation, and more time defending her vision against people who saw education as just another market to be monetized. The stress of these conflicts began affecting Jessica's health in ways she initially ignored. She experienced frequent headaches, irregular heartbeat, and shortness of breath that she attributed to the normal pressures of running a rapidly growing company. Her assistant Amanda Foster repeatedly suggested that Jessica see a doctor, but there never seemed to be time for medical appointments between board meetings, investor calls, and product development sessions. The morning of her flight to Aspen, Jessica had awakened feeling particularly unwell. Her chest felt tight, and she had difficulty catching her breath while climbing the stairs to her apartment. But she couldn't postpone this particular board meeting, where she planned to present a comprehensive argument for maintaining TechForward's commitment to educational equity, rather than pursuing more profitable but ethically questionable expansion strategies. Jessica had prepared extensively for this presentation, knowing that her board's decision would determine whether TechForward remained true to its founding mission or transformed into just another profit-driven corporation that happened to sell educational products. She had compiled data showing that their current approach was not only sustainable, but could be even more profitable in the long term if they focused on building genuine loyalty among educators and families rather than maximizing short-term revenue. As she boarded Manny's charter plane that morning, Jessica felt confident about her presentation, but increasingly concerned about her physical symptoms. The chest tightness had worsened, and she found herself struggling to breathe normally, even while sitting still. She considered mentioning her condition to the pilot, but she worried that any delay might cause her to miss the meeting that could determine her company's future direction. Jessica had no way of knowing that her pilot was the father of one of TechForward's most enthusiastic young users, or that her medical emergency would create a connection between two people whose lives had been shaped by loss and the determination to create something meaningful from difficult circumstances. She certainly couldn't have predicted that her health crisis would lead to the most important business decision she had ever made, though not in the boardroom she had been traveling toward. As the symptoms intensified and her vision began to blur, Jessica's last coherent thought before losing consciousness was about the children who depended on TechForward's platform to discover their own potential. She thought about the emails she received from teachers describing how shy students had gained confidence through coding projects, how children with learning disabilities had found new ways to express their intelligence, how kids from low-income families had discovered career possibilities they had never imagined. In that moment of crisis, 35,000 feet above the Colorado mountains, Jessica Chen realized that all her preparation for boardroom battles meant nothing if she didn't survive to continue the fight for educational equity. The irony that her life now depended on a stranger's decision-making under pressure would have been amusing if she had been conscious enough to appreciate it. Instead, she could only trust that the pilot she had barely acknowledged during boarding would make the right choice when faced with an impossible situation. Meanwhile, in the cockpit, Manny Rodriguez was making rapid calculations about descent rates, fuel consumption, and medical response times, while simultaneously radiating Rocky Mountain Regional Airport to request emergency landing clearance. His airline training had prepared him for mechanical failures and weather emergencies, but this situation required him to balance his responsibility as a pilot with his understanding of human fragility gained through personal loss. The decision he made in the next 30 seconds would determine not only Jessica's survival, but also the trajectory of both their lives in ways that neither of them could possibly anticipate. As Manny pushed the aircraft into a steep descent toward the small regional airport, he thought about Elena's voice, reminding him that sometimes the most important decisions are the ones that prioritize human life over everything else, regardless of the cost. The emergency landing at Rocky Mountain Regional Airport happened with the precision of Manny's military training, combined with the desperate urgency of a father who understood that every second mattered when someone's life hung in the balance. He touched down on the narrow runway with Jessica Chen unconscious in the passenger cabin, her breathing shallow and her pulse barely detectable when the paramedics rushed aboard. As the ambulance sirens faded into the distance, Manny found himself standing alone on the tarmac, realizing that he had just made a decision that would cost his passenger millions while potentially saving her life. The next 48 hours passed in a blur of paperwork, insurance calls, and worried conversations with his employer about the financial implications of an unscheduled emergency landing. Manny learned from the hospital that Jessica had suffered a severe cardiac event, likely caused by a combination of stress, an undiagnosed heart condition, and the altitude change during flight. Dr. Patricia Wells, the attending physician, told him privately that his decision to land immediately had prevented what would have been a fatal heart attack at cruising altitude. 3 days after the emergency landing, Manny received an unexpected visitor at Rocky Mountain Aviation's small office. Sophia had been particularly excited about visiting her father at work that afternoon, bouncing in the passenger seat of his pickup truck as they drove through downtown Denver. She loved seeing the planes up close and hearing the stories about different passengers and destinations, living vicariously through her father's adventures in the sky. When they arrived at the hangar, Sophia immediately noticed the woman in the expensive business suit walking slowly across the tarmac, moving carefully as if each step required conscious effort. Jessica Chen looked different from her usual polished appearance in the business magazines that Sophia had studied obsessively. Her normally perfect hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, her makeup was minimal, and she wore comfortable clothes that suggested she was still recovering from her medical emergency. Sophia recognized her immediately, despite the casual appearance. She had memorized every interview, every photograph, every article about TechForward Industries and its founder. To Sophia, Jessica Chen wasn't just a successful businesswoman. She was a hero who had created a platform that allowed children like herself to turn their ideas into digital reality. Sophia had spent countless hours on TechForward's educational platform, building interactive stories about her mother's medical career and creating simple games that helped her process grief through creative expression. Manny watched his daughter's eyes widen with recognition and excitement as Jessica approached their small group near the hangar. He had mentioned to Sophia that he had recently transported an important passenger to the hospital, but he hadn't revealed the identity of that passenger, knowing that his daughter would worry about someone she admired so deeply. Now, seeing Jessica walking toward them with obvious effort, Manny realized that his emergency landing had created an unexpected opportunity for Sophia to meet her inspiration in person. Jessica had come to Rocky Mountain Aviation specifically to thank the pilot who had saved her life, though she hadn't expected to encounter a young girl who clearly recognized her despite her decidedly unglamorous post-hospital appearance. She noticed Sophia's excited whispers to her father and the way the child's face lit up with recognition, but Jessica assumed this was simply normal curiosity about meeting someone who had been in the local news following the emergency landing incident. Sophia approached Jessica with the fearless enthusiasm that children often display when meeting someone they admire, but her first words revealed a depth of knowledge that surprised even Manny. Instead of asking for an autograph or making small talk, Sophia launched into a detailed description of her latest project on TechForward's platform, an interactive story about pilots and emergency responders that she had been working on for weeks. The sophistication of Sophia's programming concepts and her articulate explanation of the educational principles behind her project impressed Jessica more than most presentations she had seen from professional developers. This 8-year-old girl understood user experience design, basic coding logic, and storytelling structure in ways that demonstrated genuine talent rather than superficial familiarity with the platform. As Sophia continued explaining her project, Jessica began asking more detailed questions about her programming experience, her favorite features of the TechForward platform, and her ideas for improvements to the educational tools. Their conversation evolved from polite, adult-child interaction to genuine technical discussion between two people who shared a passion for using technology to solve meaningful problems. Manny watched this exchange with growing amazement, seeing his daughter engage with her hero in ways that revealed capabilities he hadn't fully recognized. Sophia's excitement was infectious, but her knowledge was impressive even to someone who understood the complexity of the educational platform she was describing. Jessica, meanwhile, seemed genuinely energized by Sophia's enthusiasm, asking follow-up questions that encouraged the young girl to explain her thinking process and creative decisions. The conversation that developed between Jessica and Sophia over the next hour covered topics ranging from the future of educational technology to the importance of making coding accessible to children from diverse backgrounds. Jessica found herself sharing insights about company philosophy and product development that she rarely discussed outside of board meetings, while Sophia offered suggestions for platform improvements with the unself-conscious confidence of someone who approached problems without preconceived limitations. During their discussion, Jessica learned that Sophia had been using TechForward's platform not just for entertainment, but as a way of processing complex emotions related to her mother's death. The interactive stories Sophia created often featured medical professionals, pilots, and other people whose jobs involved saving lives, suggesting that she was working through her understanding of mortality and heroism through creative expression. This revelation touched something deep in Jessica's heart, reminding her why she had created TechForward in the first place. Sophia, meanwhile, discovered that her hero was not only brilliant and successful, but also genuinely interested in hearing from young users about their experiences with the platform. Jessica asked detailed questions about Sophia's coding process, her favorite programming challenges, and her ideas for new features that would help other children learn more effectively. The conversation felt less like meeting a celebrity, and more like talking with a mentor who truly understood the joy of creating something meaningful through technology. As their discussion continued, Manny found himself observing Jessica with new interest, noticing qualities that hadn't been apparent during their brief interaction before the emergency landing. Her genuine curiosity about Sophia's projects, her thoughtful questions about childhood learning styles, and her obvious passion for educational equity revealed a person whose success was grounded in authentic care for others, rather than purely personal ambition. Jessica, in turn, began to understand that the pilot who had saved her life was raising a daughter whose intelligence and creativity exemplified exactly the kind of potential that TechForward's platform was designed to nurture. Sophia's projects demonstrated sophisticated thinking about narrative structure, problem-solving methodology, and user interface design, all developed through self-directed exploration of the educational tools that Jessica had created. The afternoon conversation evolved naturally from technical discussion to more personal topics about family, loss, and the challenge of pursuing meaningful work while maintaining emotional connections with the people who mattered most. Jessica found herself sharing struggles about balancing corporate responsibilities with personal values, while Manny described the difficulty of rebuilding a life around different priorities after experiencing devastating loss. Sophia served as an unconscious bridge between the two adults, her enthusiasm for learning and her innocent questions about their respective careers creating opportunities for Jessica and Manny to see each other as complete human beings, rather than simply professional acquaintances brought together by emergency circumstances. Through Sophia's eyes, Jessica began to understand that the pilot who had saved her life was also a devoted father, who was raising an exceptionally bright child under challenging circumstances. By the time Jessica prepared to leave the hangar that afternoon, she had gained more than just the opportunity to thank someone who had saved her life. She had discovered a family whose story embodied the values that had originally inspired her to create TechForward Industries, and she had met a child whose potential reminded her why educational equity mattered more than profit margins or investor expectations. The seeds of a deeper connection had been planted during that unexpected afternoon conversation, though none of the three participants yet understood how significantly this meeting would influence their future decisions about work, family, and the courage required to choose authentic relationships over conventional success. The friendship that developed between Jessica, Manny, and Sophia over the following weeks surprised everyone involved with its natural ease and genuine warmth. Jessica found herself visiting Rocky Mountain Aviation regularly, ostensibly to check on her rescheduled flights or discuss aviation safety protocols, but increasingly drawn by the opportunity to spend time with Sophia and witness her remarkable progress on various coding projects. These visits became the highlight of Jessica's week, providing a welcome respite from the increasingly hostile boardroom battles that dominated her professional life. TechForward Industries was experiencing unprecedented growth, but that success had attracted the attention of larger corporations interested in acquiring the company for its valuable educational platform and impressive user base. Jessica's board of directors, led by venture capitalist Robert Sterling, had been pressuring her to consider offers from major tech giants who saw educational technology as an untapped market ripe for monetization. The acquisition offers were substantial, ranging from $800 million to over $1 billion, numbers that would make Jessica incredibly wealthy while potentially compromising everything she had built. The philosophical divide between Jessica and her board members had widened into an unbridgeable chasm over the past month. Sterling and his allies argued that accepting an acquisition offer would provide TechForward with the resources to reach millions more children worldwide, scaling their educational impact beyond anything a small company could achieve independently. They presented spreadsheets showing projected user growth, market penetration statistics, and financial models that painted acquisition as not just profitable but morally imperative for maximizing educational benefit. Jessica understood the mathematical logic of their arguments, but she also understood the reality of how large corporations typically handled acquired educational platforms. She had researched the track records of every company making acquisition offers, discovering patterns of initial investment followed by gradual commercialization, introduction of premium features that created educational inequality, and eventual transformation of learning tools into profit centers that served shareholders rather than students. The tension reached a breaking point during a particularly contentious board meeting where Sterling presented an ultimatum disguised as a strategic recommendation. The board had scheduled a formal vote for the following month on whether to accept the highest acquisition offer, and Sterling made it clear that Jessica's opposition to the sale was being viewed as irresponsible leadership that prioritized personal sentiment over fiduciary duty to investors. Jessica left that meeting feeling more isolated than she had since the early days of building TechForward in her studio apartment. The people who had once supported her vision were now treating her commitment to educational equity as naive idealism that threatened everyone's financial returns. She had poured 7 years of her life into building something meaningful, only to discover that success itself had attracted forces that wanted to transform her creation into exactly the kind of profit-driven enterprise she had set out to replace. During this period of professional turmoil, Jessica's visits to Rocky Mountain Aviation became increasingly important for maintaining her emotional equilibrium. Watching Sophia work on coding projects reminded Jessica why she had started TechForward in the first place, while conversations with Manny provided perspective on the challenge of maintaining personal values under external pressure. Manny had faced his own version of this dilemma when grief and single parenthood forced him to choose between career advancement and family priorities. Sophia remained blissfully unaware of the corporate drama surrounding her favorite educational platform, focusing instead on an ambitious project that combined her interests in aviation, medicine, and interactive storytelling. She was creating a comprehensive educational game that would teach children about emergency response procedures, featuring scenarios where pilots, doctors, and other professionals had to make quick decisions under pressure. The project demonstrated sophisticated understanding of both programming logic and educational design principles. Jessica found herself increasingly involved in Sophia's project development, offering technical guidance and suggesting improvements to the user interface design. These collaborative sessions felt more fulfilling than most of her professional meetings, reminding Jessica of the joy she had experienced during TechForward's early days, when she worked directly with children and teachers rather than investors and acquisition specialists. Manny observed the growing friendship between Jessica and Sophia with appreciation mixed with concern. He could see that Jessica genuinely cared about his daughter's development and was providing mentorship that would benefit Sophia's future educational opportunities. However, he also sensed that Jessica was struggling with significant professional pressures that she hadn't fully disclosed, and he worried about how those pressures might affect her ability to maintain consistent relationships with people outside her corporate world. The crisis that would test everyone's priorities arrived through an unexpected phone call on a Thursday evening in early November. Jessica had been working late at her office, preparing for the board vote that would determine TechForward's future, when she received a call from investigative journalist Maria Santos at the Denver Business Journal. Santos had obtained leaked documents suggesting that Sterling's venture capital firm had been secretly negotiating side deals with potential acquirers, agreements that would provide Sterling's firm with additional compensation beyond their standard investor returns. The leaked documents revealed a complex web of financial arrangements that explained Sterling's aggressive push for acquisition. His firm stood to receive consulting fees, advisory positions, and equity stakes in the acquiring company that would generate millions in additional revenue beyond their existing TechForward investment. These arrangements created obvious conflicts of interest that Sterling had never disclosed to other board members or to Jessica herself. More disturbing was Santos's discovery that Sterling had been sharing confidential TechForward financial data and strategic plans with potential acquirers for months, providing them with insider information that strengthened their negotiating position while weakening Jessica's ability to maintain independence. The leaked documents included email chains showing Sterling actively undermining Jessica's leadership in conversations with acquisition teams, portraying her commitment to educational equity as a liability that would need to be managed after the sale. Jessica realized that the board vote she had been preparing for was essentially a predetermined outcome, orchestrated by people who had been betraying her trust while pretending to offer strategic guidance. The sense of betrayal was overwhelming, reminiscent of the childhood experiences when teachers had dismissed her parents' intelligence because of language barriers, or when classmates had assumed she was less capable because of her immigrant background. The immediate challenge was deciding how to respond to Santos's request for comment on the story, which would be published regardless of Jessica's cooperation. Santos had given Jessica 24 hours to provide her perspective before the article appeared, but any public statement would inevitably escalate the conflict with her board and potentially trigger legal battles that could paralyze TechForward's operations for months. Jessica spent that sleepless night walking through downtown Denver, trying to process the implications of fighting a public battle against people who controlled the majority of her company's board seats. She could attempt to expose Sterling's conflicts of interest, but doing so would create media attention that might damage TechForward's reputation and user confidence. Alternatively, she could accept the inevitable acquisition, while negotiating for protections that might preserve some elements of the company's educational mission. By dawn, Jessica had reached a decision that surprised even herself. Instead of preparing for corporate warfare or resignation, she decided to seek advice from the two people whose judgment she had come to trust most over the past few weeks. She drove directly to Manny's apartment, arriving just as he was preparing breakfast for Sophia before school. The sight of Jessica at their door at 7 in the morning, still wearing the previous day's business clothes and looking exhausted from her sleepless night, immediately told Manny that something significant had happened. Sophia, with the intuitive perception that children often possess, recognized that her mentor was facing some kind of serious problem that required adult support and understanding. Over coffee and scrambled eggs, Jessica explained the situation with Sterling, the acquisition pressure, and the ethical dilemma that now dominated every aspect of her professional life. She found herself describing not just the immediate crisis, but the deeper questions about whether it was possible to maintain authentic values while operating within systems designed to prioritize profit over principle. Manny listened with the focused attention he had once brought to air traffic control communications, understanding that Jessica wasn't just seeking advice, but also the kind of moral support that could only come from people who cared about her as a person rather than as a business asset. Sophia contributed observations about the importance of TechForward's mission that demonstrated wisdom beyond her years, reminding both adults that educational equity wasn't just a corporate philosophy, but a commitment to children whose potential might be limited by circumstances beyond their control. The conversation that morning would prove to be the turning point that determined not only TechForward's future, but also the trajectory of relationships that had developed from an emergency landing into something resembling family. The decision that changed everything came not from a boardroom strategy session, but from Sophia's simple question over breakfast that morning. If you sell your company to mean people, what happens to kids like me who can't afford expensive apps? Her 8-year-old logic cut through months of complex financial arguments with devastating clarity. Jessica realized that no amount of money was worth betraying the children who depended on TechForward's commitment to educational access. Within hours, Jessica had contacted investigative journalist Maria Santos to provide full cooperation with the exposé about Sterling's conflicts of interest. She also called an emergency press conference where she announced TechForward's decision to remain independent, restructure its board of directors, and establish a nonprofit foundation that would guarantee permanent educational equity protections regardless of future ownership changes. The public revelation of Sterling's secret deals created a media firestorm that vindicated Jessica's concerns about board integrity while attracting support from educators, parents, and advocacy groups who appreciated her commitment to principles over profit. Several ethical investors reached out to discuss funding arrangements that would allow TechForward to grow without compromising its educational mission. More importantly, the crisis had revealed the strength of the relationships Jessica had built with Manny and Sophia. During the most stressful weeks of legal battles and media attention, they provided emotional support that helped her navigate challenges with confidence rather than fear. Manny's perspective as a single parent reminded Jessica that business decisions should serve families, not exploit them. Sophia's enthusiasm for learning reinforced Jessica's conviction that education was too important to be treated as a commodity. 6 months after the emergency landing that brought them together, Jessica, Manny, and Sophia had become an unconventional family, united by shared values and mutual support. Jessica had established a community outreach program that hired parents like Manny to teach aviation concepts to children through TechForward's platform, combining his piloting expertise with her educational technology in ways that benefited both their careers and their community. The program became so successful that Manny was able to transition from charter flying to full-time educational work, developing curricula that taught children about aviation, emergency response, and decision-making under pressure. His unique combination of military training, commercial flying experience, and single parenting had prepared him perfectly for helping young people understand that technical skills and emotional intelligence were equally important for success. Sophia thrived in this environment, where her interests in technology, aviation, and helping others were not only supported but actively developed through real-world applications. She became TechForward's youngest beta tester, contributing suggestions that improved the platform's accessibility for children from diverse backgrounds. Her projects increasingly focused on creating educational tools that other kids could use to explore their own potential. Jessica discovered that building authentic relationships was not a distraction from professional success, but rather the foundation that made meaningful work possible. Her friendship with Manny had taught her that true leadership meant serving people rather than impressing investors, while her mentorship of Sophia reminded her that education was about nurturing individual potential rather than delivering standardized content. The emergency landing that had nearly cost Jessica her life had instead given her something more valuable than any acquisition offer could provide. She had found a family that supported her values, work that aligned with her principles, and the courage to choose authentic connection over conventional achievement. Years later, when Sophia graduated as valedictorian from high school, with plans to study aerospace engineering and educational technology in college, she would credit both her father and Jessica with showing her that the most important problems were solved not by choosing between personal relationships and meaningful work, but by finding ways to integrate both into a life of purpose and service. The small regional airport where Manny had made his emergency landing now featured a bronze plaque commemorating the moment when quick thinking and compassionate decision-making had saved not just one life, but had created a ripple effect of positive change that touched thousands of children through TechForward's continued commitment to educational equity. Sometimes the most important destinations are the ones you never plan to reach, discovered through emergency landings that force you to choose what truly matters when everything else falls away. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.